Right. So holistic health, right? So we took care of our nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
Next, cardio. So most people hate cardio, and I understand. It's just like, depending on the way you go about it, it's either slow torture or fast torture, but it's still torture nonetheless, right?
Correct.
But cardio is very important. One, depending on the type of cardio that we do, and usually I only range it between low intensity and high intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Low intensity cardio is really beneficial for burning extra calories, which kind of gives you a little bit more space to move around with in terms of the food that you're going to eat, right? So if you're somebody
Right.
that's not tracking your calories and you're kind of just, playing it by ear, doing more cardio on the lower intensity is really beneficial.
This is a conversation between friends.
None of what is said here should be taken as legal advice.
We are not experts in any way.
Take what resonates and leave the rest.
Oh,
All right. Hello, everybody. How are you? Welcome back. Another episode, number 83. Today's topic is holistic health. So essentially, it's taking a lot of the topics that we've talked about in the fitness section and kind of bringing it into one. So as a personal trainer, this is kind of like the way I like to kind of, pitch personal training, but more to the point, it's just a good way to go about health and fitness in general. So we'll jump right into it.
absolutely.
Do you have any
Actually
thoughts before I begin?
I was just gonna say that I have no clue what that is. I have a brief idea about what you're talking about when you mention your client, when you mention setting a workout. I'm a bit familiar with that, but with that concept, I never have heard of it before. So take the stage. It's all yours.
All right. So when I say holistic, the whole idea is to kind of take a well-rounded approach with your health and fitness. So some of the main points are your nutrition, a cardio routine or types of cardio routines, strength training, and your sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we've already talked about these points individually at different points in the podcast, but this is where I bring it all together and then present the information. That way you kind of get to see how everything plays together. So we'll start first with the nutrition. So oftentimes most people's biggest issue when it comes to nutrition is finding something they can stay consistent with, right? Because it doesn't matter if we come up with the best nutrition plan on the planet. If you can't stick consistent with it, then it's not really going to be that good of a plan. So what we need to find is the best approach for you as an individual. So here we go. The first thing you want to focus on are the calories, because when it comes to your nutrition, it does not matter what you eat or how you go about eating it. It is simply an equation of energy. So you want to make sure if we're trying to lose weight, we're burning more energy than we're consuming. If we're trying to gain weight and build muscle, we are consuming more energy than what we're spending. And we're trying to stay at the same level, then we just do a caloric maintenance. We stay at the same level, maintenance level. From there, now we can speak to eating more nutritious options, right? So when it comes to protein, you stick with your basics. You got your meats, you got your fish, you got your chicken, you have eggs. And if you're more the vegan side or vegetarian side, then you can do plant-based proteins, things related to soy, maybe tofu, whatever fits your fancy.
Mm-hmm.
Then when we go with fats, we want to make sure that we're consuming good fats, right? So we got avocados, nuts, seeds, and oils, right? Oils like olive oil, avocado oil. Then we got things like dairy. Now, depending on the individual, some people have issues with dairy. So, whatever fits best for you. But usually things like cheese and milk, pretty good options. Obviously we want to stay away from the unhealthy options. So things like, ice cream, that's usually going to be an issue for most people. A lot of sugar, a lot of refined and processed stuff in ice cream. So, there's more alternatives to ice cream, especially nowadays. Like there's ice cream that's not even made with dairy anymore. So there's different options. It's not just simply that. Let's see, anything else with fats? No, that pretty much covers fats. And the last part is your carbohydrates. So this is where people have an issue because they have a tendency of over consuming carbohydrates. because it's the easiest thing to find, right? You find it in sweets, you find it in processed foods, you find it in fast foods.
And then in
Whatever the
rice.
case is, you usually find them. Yeah, 100%.
And I feel
But,
like, coming from a Latino like background or culture, we eat a lot of rice. So that's probably one of the biggest issue for me personally. Continue.
So here's the thing with carbohydrates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your body can process that very quickly and convert that into energy. And if you're not diligent about using that energy, your body's just going to store it. And the best way to store it is as fat. So your body's usually going to store those carbohydrates as fat if you're not using it as energy. So whenever you're consuming carbohydrates, especially if you're eating a big meal that has carbohydrates, so, you already mentioned it, rice, bread, pastas, potatoes, any kind of sugars. So, things with like fruits or desserts, pastries, things like that. Basically anything that's not some sort of protein or something that's healthy fat is usually a carbohydrate. And these things turn to energy very quickly. So if you're not utilizing that, it's going to go to waste, or more to the point, it's going to be stored as fat. And that's not really where we want it to go. So that's the basic overview of calories, nutrition, and macronutrients. Yeah.
Right. So quick question for you about, like nutrition. And this is something that I struggle a lot. And you mentioned that, you got to be consistent with the diet that you choose or like follow along. But for somebody like me who actually, I don't like the tedious work about separating or counting my calories or like my macros, what would one advice would be for you? Like maybe like get like a plate and just divide by portions, or what would be the best approach? Because that's something that I kind of battle.
So I can tell you that, right. So I can tell you right off the bat that was one of my biggest issues starting off. And I saw significant weight loss without even tracking calories, without even tracking macronutrients. If you want that last little bit, that last 10, 20% to really get you to where the goal is, that's where you're going to need to do the calorie counting and the tracking. But if you want to just be generally healthy and get you 80% of the way, you can literally do it by portion sizing, right? And just eyeballing. But you need to be diligent about not overeating. And most people know when they're overeating, right? They're eating too late at night, or they're eating to the point where they're like just way too full, and then they can't function. So then they need to take a nap, right? So these are the little things those are the things you want to avoid altogether. But when it comes to portioning, usually some sort of plate that fits in the size of the palm of your hand is usually sufficient. And what you want to do is layer it in such a way where on the most base level, what you have are vegetables, because these are carbohydrates that are very nutritious, have a lot of vitamins and minerals, and it's going to help you feel fuller because it's usually packed with a lot of water. So that's going to help you feel fuller initially, right? So that's your base layer, right? A layer above that, we can go with our proteins, because we need protein as a way to, help build muscle, help regulate our hormones, help regulate there's a bunch of different processes that proteins assist us in our day-to-day life. But those are the basic ones, right? So some sort of protein. We don't want to go overly, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't want to overindulge in protein either, because your body can only process so much protein within the day, right? So, a satisfiable amount, like one piece of chicken breast, or maybe like half a piece of chicken breast, or like 3 or 4 eggs. That's a general estimate in terms of how much you should be having in protein. And then a layer above that is where you can put your carbohydrates. So something like your rice, your potatoes, and it's usually a small layer. It's not too much. Or if you have it stacked on a plate in a circular fashion, like 60% of the plate should be veggies, like 20 to 30% should be protein, and then the last bit is carbohydrates, whatever the carbohydrates, rice, potatoes. Go ahead.
So we want to keep the carbohydrate like the minimum as possible.
I would say for the most people, yeah, because again, it's fast energy, and if you're not using it, your body's going to store it as fat. So you need to be diligent about using that energy. If you're going to be active, then maybe you can scale the plate to be like 50 to 40% is your veggies, You can stick with 20-30% in protein, and then the rest of it can be carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
But again, most people aren't really that active, and that's usually where they tend to be more overweight.
Right. No, I definitely agree with that. Right now I'm here on vacation, but not really vacation, but over here. So I've been not really being consistent about like, putting myself on that aspect on my diet or choosing the appropriate diet. But other than that, like the food that I'm intaking is definitely healthy, but the amount can be a little bit challenging for me because over here they have, the culture itself. They on, breakfast, lunch, and dinner they do 2 plates, like a soup, like a plate of soup, and then the rice. So it's a little bit challenging for that, but I would definitely have to adapt and see what works for me, as well as to maintain a healthy diet as well and be consistent with it as well.
Yep.
But aside of that, what is the next phase of the term that you mentioned?
Right. So holistic health, right? So we took care of our nutrition. Next, cardio. So most people hate cardio, and I understand. It's just like, depending on the way you go about it, it's either slow torture or fast torture, but it's still torture nonetheless, right?
Correct.
But cardio is very important. One, depending on the type of cardio that we do, and usually I only range it between low intensity and high intensity. Low intensity cardio is really beneficial for burning extra calories, which kind of gives you a little bit more space to move around with in terms of the food that you're going to eat, right? So if you're somebody that's not tracking your calories, and you're kind of just, playing it by ear, doing more cardio on the lower intensity is really beneficial. That way you don't really have to pay too much mind to what you're going to be eating later on in the day. So doing more low intensity cardio, always better. One of the things that I like to recommend. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think you were getting into that. What is considered low intensity cardio?
Low intensity cardio is some type of cardio that you can do for anywhere from about like 30 to 60 minutes at a consistent pace. Like, it's not going to kill you. One of the ways I like to incorporate it, or I tell my clients to incorporate it, do more activities and movement throughout your day. One good thing that you can do is track your steps. If you can track like 10,000 steps in a day, that's 5 miles that you've moved around, and that is equivalent to about like 500 calories burned, right? So that for a lot of people is like a whole meal. So you don't even have to think about like watching what you're going to eat, because you've already burned a whole meal's worth of calories and just walking around throughout the day. So you have more space to maneuver with the calories. So that helps. One of the other approaches is it helps as a form of active recovery. So what I mean by that, and when we get to the strength training, I'll talk a little bit more about it. But when you do good strength training sessions, most of the time you're going to feel very sore, especially the day after, or if not the couple days after, especially with legs, right? So moving around is really beneficial as a form of active recovery, simply because you get the blood flowing, you get the lactic acid out of the muscles, which is usually the point where you feel the soreness, when lactic acid builds in the muscles. So when you're moving around, getting, the blood circulating, that helps get that lactic acid out of the muscle. That way you can recover a little bit faster. So rather than spending, 3 or 4 days being sore, maybe you can spend 2 or 3 days being sore. That way, it's not that uncomfortable, and then you can jump right back into the gym and do more stuff.
Absolutely.
Yep. And then the other form of cardio is your high intensity stuff, right? So, if you've played sports before, you've had these bouts of like, high intensity, right? Where you're like sprinting to the other side of the field, or you're sprinting to get to the ball, whatever the case is. And these bouts of low intensity where everything is kind of slowing down. Everything is you're kind of just waiting for stuff to build back up. So that's a type of cardio that you can do every day or every other day. And that's called high intensity interval training. So there's these bouts of, low intensity, then you spike it up. Low intensity again, then spike it up, low intensity, etc. So a good way to approach this is to do that for about 15 to 20 minutes. Doesn't matter the type of cardio, right? You can do running, you can do biking, you can do rowing. You've ever used a rowing machine before, or jump roping. There's a bunch of different types of cardio that you can do. It's not limited to one. But you do bouts of like, 1 minute, it's steady state. It's nothing too crazy. You can maintain this pace for like 30 to 60 minutes. And then for 30 seconds, you just bump up the intensity to a point where you're just like breathing heavy and it's really difficult for, 30 seconds. And then you bring it back down for a minute till you recover, you catch your breath, you can breathe normally again, and then you bring up the intensity again, right? So high, low, high, low, high, low, 15 to 20 minutes. Do that about 2 to 3 times a week. Boom, that takes care of conditioning. Now, this is critical for a lot of people for 2 aspects. 1, for strength training, and 2, for getting older. So for the strength training component, most of the time people tend to neglect conditioning and it becomes a detriment to becoming better at strength training. So when you're doing strength training, you're utilizing a lot of intensity, especially if you're doing like heavy weights or doing a lot of activity or a lot of movement with the exercises. So what is intensity? Essentially, it's just providing a lot of oxygen and blood to the muscles when you're doing these strength training routines. And guess what? If you're not conditioning yourself prior to doing these strength training routines, very easily you get fatigued way too quick. You either start getting lightheaded or at some points people start passing out because the intensity is too high, because their body, and more specifically their heart, is not conditioned to operate at these higher intensities.
Right.
So the approach that you want to take is to condition yourself to be able to operate at these higher intensities. How do you go about doing that? Exactly what I just said. Doing high intensity interval training. Do that 2 to 3 times a week. That way, when you jump into your strength training routines, boom, you're more conditioned and more able to perform at these higher outputs without needing to, be as worn out. Because sometimes people take like 5 minutes to recover from one set of a strength training session, like doing deadlifts or squats, right? So doing conditioning will quickly diminish that time, right? You can do more sets, more reps, which means you gain more muscle and more strength over time.
Can you just like kind of vary and mix with low? I mean, like, kind of like progress. So like start with the high intensity cardio, but start progressing. So let's say the first month you try to run for a mile, the next month you try to go for 2 miles, and so on forth, and kind of like progress that way. Is that like another approach to doing it?
That is definitely, that's another approach.
Okay, because the way that I understand that you're doing it is like a mix between high intensity and low intensity between days, right? Okay.
Yep.
So
yep.
there's
and you can,
different approaches.
What you just said, there was more of a constant output out of a higher intensity, right?
Right.
So with my high intensity interval training, it'd be like, for 1 minute, you're operating at like 50% capacity, and then you bump it up to like almost 90%, and then you bring it back down to 50. But what you're saying is to operate at like 70, 75% constant capacity, right? And that's still and that's still going to be a really good way to, condition you and operate at higher intensities. It doesn't matter the approach. Whatever you enjoy doing, that's what we need to find out. Because again,
so
same way with your nutrition, same thing with your cardio. You need to find something that you can stick with in the long run. Go ahead.
Correct. Yeah, I think you just mentioned what I was just gonna say. It depends on the person and the time also available, because I feel like your way is gonna be a little bit shorter time, because you run for like let's say 45 seconds, really high intensity, and then you bring it down to low intensity, and then high again. So let's say what I would do in like 20 minutes, you already done in like 5 minutes with your approach. So probably like your way is a little bit more time friendly than mine approach, because you will be like a constant improvement.
Sure.
But it definitely depends on the person that chooses to do it.
Exactly. And this type of cardio, depending on like what you do as in terms of hobbies and day-to-day activities, right? Maybe you play some sort of sport and you need to be better at having a constant output at higher intensities. So that's why you would do that type of conditioning, as opposed to, a normal person that, sits for a 9 to 5 job every day, maybe doing some more higher intensity, less time consistent things, right? So, they don't have to spend that much time in the gym. It's more beneficial. It's more time effective, and, they're getting almost the same output as what you're doing at a longer duration. And then the other parts of conditioning is for the aging component. So as you get older, everything starts slowing down. It doesn't really matter the case. You know, your metabolism slows down, your strength slows down, your reaction time slows down, everything starts slowing down. And again, going back to operating at higher intensities, more things are going to kind of stress you. And I'm not literally talking about like being stressed out. I just mean like doing day-to-day things is going to make you work harder just because everything is slowing down. So maybe you can like go up a flight of stairs and feel fine because, you know, we're 20, 22 and 23, right?
Right.
But let's say we scale that now we're 40 or 45 years old and we work a 9-to-5 job sitting down most of the time. Going up the same flight of stairs is going to elicit a greater response from that older person than the younger person. And because that intensity is so high for them relative to us, again, if your body's not conditioned to operate at higher intensities, that's going to be problematic. So it's a really good thing to kind of just upkeep doing some sort of maintenance with your high intensity interval training or high intensity cardio. That way, as you get older, doing the, you know, these basic things doesn't, you know, wear you out. You really shouldn't be at a point where going up a flight of stairs is killing you. But for a lot of people, that is the case.
True. And I think that's the case for us. Like we're at that age where we can start now, so we don't regret later. Like, you know, right now we're in that peak age where we can literally pick up any hobby or any sort of activity that involves cardio, as well as, you know, improving our diet or everyday diet. So later on, we don't pay the consequences and we just have a healthy life. And, you know, a wealthy man is a healthy man.
Yep. No, it's a healthy person, right? And like, it just makes you feel good. Like good nutrition and good cardio and strength training, it's going to make your day-to-day life so much better. You're not going to wake up and feel so sluggish. And you're not going to be doing stuff and feel so tired, which is most people's issue. You know, like everybody works their asses off so that they have some freedom and luxury. And yet when they get it, they barely have the energy to enjoy their time off or the freedom that they get.
Absolutely.
And this is the thing that you have to implement while you're, you know, let's say building up whatever it is that you're trying to do or save as much money as possible. This is what you have to do while you're simultaneously working on your work and your purpose. That way, when you get to the point where you have the freedom, you also have the energy to enjoy it, as opposed to just having a lot of freedom in terms of money and time, but no energy.
And not health. Absolutely. So what is the third phase? That would be like the strength training, right?
Sweet. So strength training, and you know, this is my bread and butter, and this is super important as well. So when it comes to strength training, the approach that I usually like to take is first start off with fundamental movements. So what are the movements that you perform every day, right? Some basic ones. Sitting and standing. That's a move everybody performs every single day, right? And you perform it maybe somewhere within the realm of 50 to 100 times a day, unconsciously, right? Because you're not really thinking about how many times you're sitting and standing. But let's say you do that every day to that extent. The other one would be picking things up off the floor, right? That's a deadlift. And if you perform it correctly, boom, you're getting a lot more work done with the muscles in your day-to-day life, as opposed to just, you know, bending over, having incorrect posture. And one of the other components, right? People have a tendency of getting injured doing the most basic things in their day-to-day life, right? It's not unheard of, like you bend over just to pick something up off the floor and then boom, you pull something. Or, you know, just like some sort of injury ends up happening on the most basic thing. So we focus on these things that you do every day. And then we do our best to perfect them in and out of the gym. So how do you perform these movements in the best form possible, in the most mechanically advantageous way possible? Utilizing the most amount of muscle groups, minimizing the amount of, you know, pressure that you're putting on the bones and your joints, because these are things that diminish over time. And if you're not careful, that's where, you know, things like arthritis and osteoporosis happen.
Oh yeah,
but your muscles are something that you can grow over time. And the more you strengthen them, the more you utilize them, the more you can rely on them and not have to worry about injury or whatever ends up happening later on in life. So we focus on the fundamentals, and then we can focus on building strength. Because once your fundamentals are solid, all I have to do is incorporate more resistance. So I add more weights, right? I add more repetitions. I add a tempo to the exercises. So like 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down, or whatever the case is. And that's it. We just scale that up. We'd focus on exercises that you enjoy doing, exercises that are functional, that you incorporate every day into your day-to-day life. That's it.
You know, something that you just mentioned about like the getting the fundamentals done, like getting them out of the way, right? Because they are pretty much the core or the base to when you go to the gym. And this is something from my personal experience. Like when I started going to the gym, I became a little bit more conscious about the way that I move my body. For example, instead of like, if I need to pick up something from the floor, instead of just like leaning down, I actually did like a squat and pick it up, just because I was conscious about the movements that I was getting involved in that movement, right? So my legs, my back, and all that sort of stuff. So I feel like even like going to the gym or just working out and doing this on a lower scale, it can be very, very beneficial for somebody to conduct everyday movements in the right way, in the right position, because like you mentioned, little things they add up. And eventually, if you're doing it correctly, they kind of wear off your body and will cause that can cause that can cause injuries in the future. Damn, my English is sucks right now.
No, you're good. It's exactly that. It's exactly that, right?
True.
So you do the things incorrectly enough times, right? And like any machine, right? Like you do it incorrectly enough times, and something's bound to break. A piece is bound to break off, or something's bound to happen. And your body's a machine, and if you do things incorrectly, something bad is bound to happen. But if you do them correctly, you strengthen and actually get better at these things. You actually lessen your chances of getting injured, even if you do things incorrectly from time to time, right? So that's a good approach, or that's a good way to go about doing strength training. Because again, like repetition is the mother of all, right? Like the more you keep repeating something, the better you're going to get at it, whatever it is.
It's brain muscle.
And if you're performing these movements perfectly, then you're going to easily transition from your gym life into your day-to-day life, back and forth, and you're going to keep practicing these movements over and over and over again.
Like we always say, everything is transferable. Like soft skills, even like the hard skills, like like the physical skills, they transfer over time to every single aspect of your life. So that definitely health is one of those things that you need to put as a priority, and it's probably one of the biggest investments that you can do now that we are young and not regret later. But yeah, continue.
All right. So last part that pretty much covers the strength training. That's basically it. The last component now is the sleep, and this is the most critical. Right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people struggle with sleep, and it's a really big issue. Simply because if your sleep is off, literally everything that I've mentioned in terms of nutrition, cardio, and strength training will like basically be reduced by half. So all this work that you're doing at the most minimum level is reduced by half. At the upper level, it's literally completely negating everything that you're doing. Like you're going to be working your ass off and doing everything, but you're not going to see any results because your sleep is off. That means you're not recovering properly. Usually that throws your hormones out of whack, which is another thing that becomes a problem, whether that be due to, building more muscle or losing fat. When your hormones are completely out of whack, dude, like there's literally nothing, no level of work that you can do that's going to counter that, because your hormones are literally everything, right? So we need to be very diligent about your sleep so that you have a balanced system, a balanced hormonal profile, a balanced everything. So here's a couple of things that most people have an issue with when it comes to sleep. 1, too much caffeine, and caffeine late at night or late relative to the time they're going to sleep. So caffeine is supposed to be consumed, the recommendation, at the max, about 300 milligrams, which is about 3 cups of coffee a day.
Oof, that's a lot.
That's a lot, right?
That's a lot.
But a lot of people don't understand that that's like a small cup. And if you go to Starbucks, most of the time people are getting like a grande or something even more than that. Like they're getting a grande with espresso shots.
Grande is the small one. Venti is the biggest one.
No. Grande is the biggest one.
No, bro. That the way that they do it,
or whatever. Venti or grande, whatever the largest cup is. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Nah,
when
I'm
I go to
pretty.
Starbucks, I don't care. I literally just tell them I want a small or medium or large.
Oh, nah, I always confuse with that. Every time that they say grande, grande is the small one, and then I don't recall the medium one, but venti is the biggest one. But yeah.
Right.
But
Well,
continue.
regardless of the case, that biggest one is basically 3 cups of coffee, right? And sometimes a lot of people like they literally put even more caffeine into it because now, you know, they don't sleep well, so they don't have a lot of energy, so they completely burn out. So there you go. That's one thing. Next, oh yeah, so drinking it late at night.
Mhm.
So caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours. So every 6 hours, you will feel a diminishing effect from the caffeine. But here's the thing with caffeine. One, it's meant to give you energy. And
Right.
two, it's meant to basically block these transmitters in your brain from making you feel tired. So hypothetically speaking, once you start building more of a tolerance to caffeine, that becomes a problem because, you need more caffeine to feel energized. But that doesn't mean that the effect of the transmitters that are being blocked is stopping, right? So these transmitters are being blocked, and maybe you're not getting the energy from the caffeine anymore, but you're not necessarily feeling that level of exhaustion that you should be feeling. Because
Right.
most of the time, that's why we use caffeine, right? To blunt the fact that we're tired. So you do that for extended period of time with more caffeine. All you're doing is basically pushing back this wall that once it hits, you're done. Like physically, your body cannot function anymore. You keep doing that progressively over time, over days, weeks, and months. That's going to be where most people either have issues sleeping because they start building insomnia, or a bunch of stress and anxiety starts building up, and literally just like they cannot fall asleep at night anymore. So
Right.
when it comes to caffeine, limit it to about like 12 to 2 p.m. in the morning or in the afternoon, give or take, early afternoon. But ideally, what we want is to have a nice amount of time between the time that you take caffeine and the time that you're going to sleep. So
For sure.
usually when I say 12 p.m., most people are going to sleep like around 11 p.m. That's a big gap of time. That's like almost 12 hours. It's 11 hours. Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours. And, you basically have it out of your system by the time you're going to sleep at 6 or at 11. So that's a good way to go about it. So the earlier you have caffeine, try to, mitigate it or try to minimize it and have it only for the earlier part of the day. And
Right.
if you're going to have it late at night, understand that it's going to affect you. Maybe you're not going to get energized in the same way that you used to because you build a tolerance, but that's still going to be a problem in terms of actually getting restful sleep. All right. So the other component to sleep is usually food and liquids. So when it comes to food, this goes to the people that eat late at night, right? So when you're consuming food and your body's trying to digest this food and, try to use that energy to, replenish sources, replenish glycogen storages, help recover muscles, help recover cells in your body, help recover bones, etc. That's a whole process, and that requires a lot of energy, right? But when you're trying to go to sleep, that's a different process. That's the process of you recovering, rejuvenating, waking up, and feeling good. When you have these two things happening simultaneously, when you're trying to go to sleep, that becomes a problem because they're going counter against each other. One is wasting energy, or one is taking energy away from you, and the other one is trying to replenish energy away from you, right? So it's essentially having a positive and a positive. They're going to bounce off each other. So you need to do your best to make sure that when you're going to sleep, your body is fully focused on sleeping. And when you're eating food, you're fully focused on digesting food. So, it's not unheard of that people eat something in the middle of the day and then get tired and then take a nap. That's not too much of an issue if you're going to be doing stuff later on throughout the day. But if you eat food, take a nap, and then you don't do anything else for the rest of the day, you just lay there, or, you're in your room sitting on a computer screen, in front of the computer screen, it's very problematic because that energy is just going to be stored and built into body fat. So do not go to sleep and eat food. Or if you're going to eat food, make sure you're not going to sleep.
Okay.
That's as simple as I can do it. So usually a time frame of about 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed is usually where you want to be when you're eating stuff. And don't eat too heavy, especially for that last meal, because it takes time for your food to digest.
For sure.
And one of the other components I forgot to mention with the low intensity cardio, that also helps with digesting food, right? So if you have food and you go out for a walk after you're done with the eating, that's a good way to help digest the food and kind of use that energy as opposed to just sitting there in your stomach. You're using that energy and it's being digested a little bit faster. So that's a good thing that you can do with your cardio as well. And then the other component is liquids. So this goes towards those people that wake up in the middle of the night to go pee, right?
Right.
So when it comes to sleeping, we want to maximize deep sleep. And we talked about this before with REM sleep, right?
Yeah.
So it's going through those cycles of REM. And what we want to do is make sure that those cycles are not being disturbed. You should be going through these cycles over and over again until you wake up the following morning. And if at any point you feel the disturbance and you wake up in the middle of the night, you have to repeat the process. And again, deep sleep is usually the last stage of REM, and that's where you're usually getting the most amount of recovery and rejuvenation from your sleep. And if you're not getting to those stages, most of the time people, sleep very lightly. They don't get to the fourth stage or the last stage, and they wake up the next morning and they feel like shit. They don't feel energized. They don't feel rejuvenated. They just feel sluggish. So try to minimize liquids before you go to sleep. That way you don't wake up in the middle of the night to go pee.
Correct.
That's another thing. All right. And then the last component comes to sleep, and then we're done. So blue light, and we've talked about it before, right?
Yeah, that is a huge issue nowadays, actually.
Blue light is emitted by all the technology that we have around us. My phone, or this phone that I'm talking on, televisions, laptops, computers, you name it, it probably has blue light. And as we said before, blue light stops the production of melatonin in your brain. And melatonin is a hormone that is basically there to facilitate you going to sleep. Once it's in your system, you start feeling this tiredness. It's what's usually emitted at night because it's time for you to go to sleep. Your natural circadian rhythm starts emitting more of it at night because, hey, it's late, it's time to go to sleep, wake up the next morning. But blue light blocks that from happening. So again, you probably had the experience of being on your phone at night, scrolling through Instagram or maybe on your laptop, watching a show on Netflix or playing some games in the middle of the night, and you're just not tired and you can just kind of power through it all. And then it's 4 a.m. and, now you're starting to feel a little bit tired, but the only reason why you're going to sleep is because you got to wake up early-ish in the morning. And it's not really because you're tired, because you can keep going. So again, that's what blue light does. So we want to stop that from happening. That way you actually sleep and get, rejuvenated and replenished for the next day. So the two approaches that we talked about before was, one, blocking the blue light. So incorporating the filters that the technology that we have used. So, usually there's a dark mode on the phone and the laptops, or some sort of filter where it turns the screen a little bit orange. So you can use that. You can use glasses that have a blue blocking lens. So that kind of helps mitigate a little bit more of the blue light. So if you combine the lenses with, some sort of screen thing that turns it into a dark mode, that takes care of 80 to 90% of your problem when it comes to blue light. Then the other component is to supplement, right? So if melatonin is the issue, this is a naturally occurring hormone, so you can easily supplement with it, and you can get it at any vitamin store. So you can start with a small dose and scale that depending on how you feel from it. If a small dose elicits a good response, then stick with that. You'll usually feel like a 20 to 30 minute period after taking it where you're starting to feel a little bit tired. That's where you want to go to bed, because like any medication, right? If you power through that point where you start feeling tired, you're going to stay up. It doesn't matter. So once you start feeling that tiredness, that's where you take advantage of the melatonin, and boom, you go to sleep and do your best with everything that we mentioned earlier, not eating late, not drinking a lot of liquids, not drinking too much caffeine. You combine these things, boom, you go to sleep, you wake up the next day and you're good to go. You feel good. I'm ready.
Right. And I think there's one thing that we can do about sleep is pretty much cutting it off altogether, not using any blue light device or interact with it for maybe half hour to 1 hour, and that can truly improve your quality of sleep, because at the end of the day, sleep is pretty much crucial for a healthy lifestyle. And getting those 6 to 8 hours of sleep is going to be very, very important in the long run, especially to maintain healthy,
Yep.
to be healthy and just,
Mhm.
not be tired at your 20s, but yeah,
Yeah, and especially as
those
a
are
college student, right? Like
absolutely.
it's so normal for college students to literally just be walking around like zombies.
Oh, fuck, yeah, it's all about it.
So
But yeah, no,
there you
I
go.
think the points that you went over, they're well condensed, well put together. So something that the main takeaway is that we need to watch out for our diet, which is our nutrition, some sort of cardio, whichever we choose to, low or high intensity, whichever help us to maintain and keep a balanced calorie intake. A strength training for the movement of our body, just so it doesn't deteriorate through time, and just to be strong and remain strong. And the last one, and which is the most crucial, will be sleep. And I think that's the key for everything to fall into place. But yeah, I actually learned a lot from you today. I don't have anything else to add up. I think we have broken it apart into different episodes in the past, but this episode was pretty well together about all around. What was the term again?
Holistic.
Holistic. But yeah, so it's a really interesting concept, and I think it can be very, very helpful for a lot of young people like us, to just be healthy and look ahead to the years in the future, and just be at a point where they can truly enjoy their lives being healthy.
All right, man. I
So
think that
we
pretty
can
much covers it all.
Yeah, that wraps us up. Thank you so much for those, for breaking it apart, walking us through it, and it was very
No problem.
informational.
My pleasure.
All right. All right, then peace out.
What the is we doing?